Ko Moon-young is on her way to pick up a patient named Kwon from the OK Psychiatric Hospital. Kwon is a mental patient who likes to expose his private parts to others. Moon-young makes fun of his tiny ding-dong and then puts him in her car, driving off quickly. However, on the way, Moon Gang-tae, a caregiver of the hospital, steps in front of her car to make her stop. Moon-young is speeding directly toward him, and it seems like she's about to run him over. But at the last moment, she slams on the brakes. Gang-tae warns Moon-young to return the patient to the hospital, but she refuses and speeds off. Gang-tae quickly borrows his fellow nurse Nam-juri's car and starts chasing after her. Moon-young is doing all of this to get Gang-tae's attention. She's taking Kwon to his father, who is an assemblyman. Along the way, they cause chaos throughout the city. Eventually, they reach the location where Kwon's father is supposed to give a speech. Kwon gets on stage and tells everyone how his father never paid attention to him. He shares that he used to do strange things to get his father's attention, which led to his mental instability and eventual hospitalization in a psychiatric facility. He then asks how someone who couldn't even care for his own child could possibly take care of the country. Gang-tae, who had come to take Kwon back to the hospital, is left in shock, along with the rest of the audience. The police arrive to arrest Kwon, but he keeps dancing on stage while revealing the truth. This news spreads across the country, and everyone learns the truth about the assemblyman, leading people to despise him. Eventually, the police manage to arrest Kwon. At that moment, his mother slaps him and angrily asks why he always behaves this way. Instead of feeling sad, Kwon feels happy because his mother finally gave him some attention. Later, Gang-tae is called to the hospital director's office because he failed to keep the patient in the hospital. The assemblyman, who is also in the office, threatens to shut down the hospital. A flashback shows Gang-tae as a child, winning a red belt in Taekwondo. He excitedly runs home to share the good news with his mother. Unfortunately, on the same day, his older brother, Sang-tae, who is autistic, was bullied by the neighborhood kids and got injured. When Gang-tae shows his mother the red belt, she scolds him and tells him that she enrolled him in Taekwondo classes so he could protect Sang-tae. But he failed. Angered by this, Gang-tae yells that he wasn't born just to protect Sang-tae and that he belongs to himself, not anyone else. In a fit of rage, he wishes his older brother were dead and throws his belt away before running off. Sang-tae picks up the belt and runs after Gang-tae to give it back to him. They end up near a glacier, where everything is covered in snow. Sang-tae hands Gang-tae the belt and tells him to take care of it. Gang-tae puts off his anger, and he accepts the belt. They then start playing in the snow, but as they play, the ice beneath Sang-tae melts, and he begins to drown in the freezing water. Instead of helping him, Gang-tae initially tries to run away. However, he soon realizes his mistake, turns back, and jumps into the freezing water to save him. Sang-tae, now in shock, doesn't look back as Gang-tae starts to drown. Meanwhile, Moon-young is sitting nearby, watching everything unfold. She's plucking petals from a flower, trying to decide whether or not she should help. Even though she doesn't come to a clear answer, she still decides to help Gang-tae. She throws a large piece of ice into the water, and with its help, Gang-tae manages to save himself. He thanks Moon-young, but she walks away without looking at him. Gang-tae has now fallen in love with her. He brings her flowers, but due to Moon-young's antisocial personality, she doesn't respond to his love the way he hopes. Instead, she cruelly rips apart a butterfly in front of him, trying to scare him, and asks if he could still love her after seeing that. Gang-tae becomes frightened and runs away. Now, 20 years have passed. Moon-young has become a very famous writer with thousands of fans. Even Gang-tae's brother, Sang-tae, is a big fan of hers and waits in line to get her autograph. Meanwhile, Gang-tae tries to avoid being seen by Moon-young, but she spots him in the crowd. On the other hand, Sang-tae notices a child holding a dinosaur toy and becomes immediately drawn to it. Sang-tae is very interested in dinosaurs and starts loudly explaining all the details about the toy. However, the child's father, wanting to keep his child away from Sang-tae, pushes him. This catches the attention of everyone around. The man then grabs Sang-tae by the hair, which triggers Sang-tae to scream loudly. This reaction is linked to a traumatic memory from his past. Hearing his brother's screams, Gang-tae rushes over to help, placing his jacket over Sang-tae and comforting him by saying that everything is okay and there's no need to worry. Just then, Moon-young also arrives and confronts the child's father, asking why he did that. The man responds that Sang-tae was making too much noise. In response, Moon-young grabs the man by the hair, causing him to scream as well. She then points out that anyone would make noise if someone grabbed their hair like that. She even silences the man's wife when she tries to intervene. This incident makes the news, with reports stating that Moon-young attacked her fans, leading to her being trolled on social media. However, Moonyoung doesn't care about that and continues to stare intently at Gang Tae. Later, Sang-tae, deeply shaken, hides in a room and starts crying. Outside, Gang Tae and Moonyoung wait for him to calm down. Gang Tae tells Moonyoung that she didn't need to get involved in this matter. Moonyoung responds that it was her duty because those people were causing violence at her book signing event. She then mentions that she feels like she has seen Gang Tae somewhere before but can't remember when. Gang Tae remains silent, not responding to her comment. Meanwhile, one of Moonyoung's book editors approaches Gang Tae and whispers in his ear, warning him to stay away from her, as she will only bring him ruin. Moonyoung overhears this and gets agitated. She tries to go after the editor, but Gang Tae grabs her hand and urges her to control her anger. Moonyoung retorts that he has no authority over her and then runs after the editor. Downstairs, Moonyoung catches up with the editor and asks him what his problem is. The editor, with a smirk, tells her that he finds money boring now, and if she wants him to continue editing her books, she will have to start a sexual relationship with him. Furious, Moonyoung pulls a pen from his pocket and is about to stab him in the neck, but she remembers Gang Tae's words and stops herself. Instead, she gives the man a slight shove, causing him to fall down several flights of stairs, breaking his neck. An ambulance arrives to take the man away. When Moonyoung returns, Gang Tae holds her from behind and instructs her to take deep breaths. He then tells her to cross her arms and place her hands on her shoulders, breathing deeply to help her control her anger. However, she then begins to seduce Gang Tae, and she suddenly feels a surge of emotions toward him. It seems as if a hidden memory from her past has resurfaced, but she can't quite understand why she feels this way. She asks him why he doesn't join her team, to which he responds that he has many other responsibilities and can't do it. It seems like Gang Tae is trying to avoid her, but this very avoidance only increases Moonyoung's attraction toward him. Later, Moonyoung assigns her assistant art director, Yoo Seung-jae, the task of digging up all the information she can find on Gang Tae. Through this, she discovers that Gang Tae works as a caregiver at a psychiatric hospital in Seongjin City, a small city neighboring Seoul. Determined to see him, Moonyoung travels all the way from Seoul to Seongjin. Gang Tae is changing in the locker room when Moonyoung sneaks up behind him. As she watches his body, she becomes even more captivated by him. Gang Tae quickly grabs her and takes her outside. But just as they exit, Juri, who also works at the hospital, sees them together. Juri has a crush on Gang Tae, and seeing them together makes her furious inside. To provoke Juri further, Moonyoung places her hand on Gang Tae's body, but Gang Tae quickly pulls away. After Gang Tae's shift ends, Moonyoung offers him a ride home in her car, but he declines, saying he will take the local bus instead. Moonyoung, not one to back down easily, warns him that next time she'll take him by force if necessary. A few days later, in an effort to stay close to Gang Tae, Moonyoung decides to leave her writing career behind and takes up a job as a lecturer at OK Psychiatric Hospital. Her job involves giving mental training to the patients through storytelling. During one of her sessions, she asks the patients what they think the meaning of fairy tales is. The patients respond that fairy tales are just meant to entertain and distract people. Moonyoung, however, challenges this notion by saying that fairy tales are actually cruel fantasies that paradoxically illustrate the brutality and violence of the world. She emphasizes that true happiness can only be found by facing reality head-on. The patients, who are initially shocked by her unorthodox views, end up being impressed by her perspective and begin to admire her for giving them a new way to think. After the lecture, Gang Tae approaches Moonyoung and asks if she really believes that fear can only be conquered by facing the truth. Instead of answering directly, Moonyoung turns the question back on him, wondering what fear he is trying to overcome. Gang Tae says nothing in response and quietly walks away. Unwilling to let it go, Moonyoung follows him, remarking that, although he seems tough on the outside, she knows he's soft inside, a quality she finds very appealing. Gang Tae remains silent, avoiding her words. She then brings up a dream she had about him, where he was showing her the relaxation technique he taught her earlier, even embracing her as he explained it. Frustrated, Gang Tae tells her to stop talking and questions what kind of thoughts she's having. With her usual mischievous tone, Moonyoung teases him loudly, asking if he wants to sleep with her, which causes everyone around them to laugh. Gang Tae, now visibly upset, grabs her and pulls her into a private room, demanding to know what her problem is and telling her to leave him alone, warning that she won't get anything from him. Moonyoung, undeterred, calls him a hypocrite, claiming she knows he has feelings for her but is too scared to show them. She warns him that if he continues to live in fear, he'll never truly live. And then she walks away. As she's leaving, she catches sight of her father, Ko Dae-hwan, sitting in his wheelchair in the hospital where he's been for more than a decade. His presence startles her, but she quickly brushes it off and walks past him without acknowledgement. On her way out, Sun Byul stops her, reminding her that if she works at the hospital, it's her responsibility to care for her father as well. Moon Young, unfazed, dismisses the concern, saying it doesn't matter to her, and leaves without a second thought. Later, Gang Tae takes Sang Tai to director Oh Ji-wong, who conducts his psychological assessment. He also reviews the drawings that Sang Tai has made, gaining some insight into his state of mind. Oh Ji-wong then tells Sang Tai to paint a beautiful mural on one of the hospital walls, offering him a reward in return. Sang Tai agrees but demands payment for his work. Ji-wong promises that the better the painting, the higher the reward he will receive. At night, Sang Tai opens his small piggy bank, carefully saving up money. Curious, Gang Tae asks why he's collecting so much money. Sang Tai reveals that he's saving to buy an RV for the two of them, so that they don't have to worry about moving to a new city every year. This desire stems from Sang Tai's past trauma, which haunts him every spring. The trauma is connected to their mother's murder, which is stuck deeply in Sang Tai's memory. He was the only one with their mother when she was killed, but he can't remember who did it. The only thing he clearly remembers is that a butterfly was involved, and it has since become a symbol of his fear. To try to escape this fear, Sang Tai and Gang Tae move to different cities every spring, hoping to avoid seeing the butterfly. Gang Tae hugs Sang Tai and cries, promising that they will overcome this trauma together. The next day, Moon Young forcefully makes Gang Tae get into her car. After driving for a short distance, Gang Tae steps out of the car, intending to walk back on his own. As he leaves, Moon Young stops him and finally confesses her feelings, saying, "I love you." Gang Tae continues to walk away, ignoring her confession, but Moon Young persistently repeats, "I love you," as if she's making a joke out of it. That night, Moon Young returns to her home, a mansion built by her father in the middle of a forest. Her father had constructed the mansion years ago to provide a peaceful environment for Moon Young's mother, who was also a writer, so she could write in solitude. However, the mansion has been abandoned for over 20 years and now stands in ruins. As Moon Young arrives, her publisher, the CEO of Sangsang Esong Publishing Company, Lee Song-in, is there waiting for her. Afterwards, Song-in asks Moon Young why she hasn't resumed writing books and what has happened to her. He insists that she must return to Seoul to continue her new book, warning that without her, both he and his company will face bankruptcy. Moon Young responds that she has no interest in writing at the moment and is preoccupied with other work. That night, Moon Young dreams of her mother brushing her hair, appearing quite frightening to her. In the dream, she sees blood flowing from the basement door and discovers her mother's dead body lying on the floor. This vision makes Moon Young feel as though her mother's spirit still lingers in the house. The next day, Sang Tai takes photos of beautiful scenery and starts working on his painting. Moon Young arrives unexpectedly, surprising Sang Tai, who is delighted to see his favorite writer. He starts taking selfies with her. Ju Ri questions Moon Young about her presence, noting that she doesn't have classes that day. Moon Young explains that she came just to see Gang Tae. As Moon Young admires Sang Tai's artwork, he asks her for money, but she declines to provide it at that moment. Playfully, Moon Young tries to tug on Sang Tai's hair, but Gang Tae intervenes, holding her hand and instructing her to stay away from his brother. He then scolds Sang Tai for sitting beside Moon Young and orders him to never meet her again. Moon Young then notices a slap mark on Gang Tae's face, which worries her. She questions him about it, and then Gang Tae takes her aside to talk privately and reveals that the mark is from a slap by the assembly member, Kwon's father. The man has threatened to shut down the hospital due to his negligence. Gang Tae her of causing trouble and demands that she stay out of his life. He explains that she doesn't understand his struggles and calls her an empty vessel with no emotions. He rejects her and leaves, leaving Moon Young feeling deeply saddened. Moon Young tries to compose herself and decides to visit her father, fulfilling her promise to take him out. However, when she approaches him, he suddenly becomes enraged, grabs her by the neck, and accuses her of being a monster. As he chokes her, Moon Young struggles to breathe, but bystanders manage to intervene and rescue her. Despite being saved, Moon Young feels deeply heartbroken. She walks away on foot, overwhelmed by her sorrow. Gang Tae, who is on a bus, sees her from a distance. Once home, he starts reading Moon Young's book, The Zombie Kid, that Sang Tae had bought. The story is about a zombie child who was infected by a virus and turned into a zombie. Despite this, his mother does not kill him but continues to bring animals for him to eat. Eventually, a plague kills all the animals and people abandon the village. The mother stays behind to care for her son. With no food left, she cuts her own flesh to feed him. And eventually, all her limbs are severed, leaving only her torso. Before she dies, she holds her son close. And for the first time, the zombie child speaks, telling her that she is warm and beautiful. Even the heartless zombie is moved by the maternal affection. This story deeply touches Gang Tae, bringing back memories of his own mother. Overcome with emotion, he starts to cry. At that moment, his friend Jae-soo arrives and asks if he has seen Moon-young. Gang Tae suddenly realizes that Moon-young was walking back to the hospital on foot, and he immediately decides to find her. He grabs Jae-soo's bike and heads out into the rain to look for her. Eventually, he spots Moon-young walking barefoot and soaked through the rain. Without hesitation, he runs to her, takes off his jacket, and wraps it around her, hugging her. He then takes her to a nearby motel, asking for 2 separate rooms. Moon-young insists they should stay in the same room, but Gang Tae refuses. When Moon-young is asked if she has money, she admits she forgot her purse in her car. Gang Tae is upset, questioning why she isn't taking better care of herself and why she's putting herself through this. In response, Moon-young flirts with him again, asking why he cares so much about her and if he might be in love with her. Gang Tae is taken aback and embarrassed by her bold question. He then asks the motel owner for the price of a single room and learns that it costs 50,000 won. While searching for his wallet, Gang Tae realizes he has left it behind. Moon-young, frustrated, scolds him for being so careless. She suggests he should drive the bike again and find another place. With no other choice, Gang Tae takes Moon-young to his home, which is actually the house of Ju-ri's mother, Kang Soon-deok. He lives on the first floor on a modest rent. When Moon-young sees the state of the house, she questions how Gang Tae manages to live in such a small space. Gang Tae explains that her presence there must remain a secret, and that he brought her there out of moral obligation, not for any romantic reasons. Gang Tae tells Moon-young to rest for the night and leave first thing in the morning. Despite his repeated refusals, Moon-young tries to flirt with him. Gang Tae becomes increasingly frustrated and scolds her, asking her to stop. Meanwhile, Sang Tae is deeply upset because Gang Tae shouted at him. He continues hitting his head against the wall in sadness. Gang Tae, feeling guilty, tries to calm him down, apologizes for his outburst, and asks for forgiveness. Gang Tae then goes downstairs to bring food. Soon-deok invites him to eat with them, but Gang Tae says he's not feeling well and will eat in his room. He brings the food to Moon-young, who enjoys the meal. Despite Gang Tae's attempts to maintain boundaries, Moon-young continues to make sexual advances, which he firmly rejects. Jae-soo arrives and, seeing the situation, Gang Tae forces him to leave to avoid any disturbances. Jae-soo is suspicious, but ultimately departs. Throughout the night, Moon-young tries to seduce Gang Tae, but he repeatedly pushes her away. In the morning, as Moon-young watches the sunrise, Ju-ri arrives and is shocked to find her there. She questions Moon-young about her presence, and Moon-young explains that she stayed the night with Gang Tae. Ju-ri, upset, confronts Moon-young, leading to a heated argument. Ju-ri then slaps Moon-young, who retaliates by grabbing Ju-ri's hair. The fight escalates, drawing Gang Tae's attention. He intervenes, telling Moon-young to leave. Moon-young, furious, demands to know why Gang Tae didn't stop Ju-ri and why she has to leave. Gang Tae tells her that their relationship must end here and gives her money for the return journey. Moon-young rejects the money and throws it away, expressing her frustration. Ju-ri then cries to her mother, Soon-deok, about how Gang Tae is treating her. Soon-deok reassures Ju-ri, telling her not to worry and that Gang Tae isn't genuinely interested in Moon-young. She encourages Ju-ri to remain hopeful and assures her that things will work out. The next day, Sang-tae starts painting the wall at the hospital when director Oh Ji-won approaches him and suggests that he include butterflies in his artwork. However, Sang-tae is terrified of butterflies and refuses, saying he would never draw them. Despite his refusal, director Oh insists multiple times. This angers Sang-tae, and he lashes out, chasing director Oh around the hospital. Everyone in the hospital enjoys this humorous scene. As the day progresses, at sunset, Gang Tae and Ju-ri stand on the hospital rooftop, watching the sunset. Gang Tae tells Ju-ri not to have too many expectations from him because he's uncertain about his future, whether he'll quit his job or leave the city. Ju-ri, understanding his situation, reminds him that she knows he has changed cities many times before, and despite everything, she has always followed him. She admits she knows he may leave again, but asks him to at least allow her to like him while he is still there. Later, Moon-young visits Sang-tae and praises his drawing skills, offering him a job as an illustrator for her books. Sang-tae agrees, and Moon-young takes him to her mansion. Sang-tae is impressed by the grandeur of the mansion, and Moon-young makes him sign a handwritten agreement, officially hiring him as her lead designer. Meanwhile, Gang Tae becomes worried when he can't find Sang-tae at the hospital. A staff member informs him that Moon-young has taken Sang-tae with her. Gang Tae calls Moon-young, demanding to know where Sang-tae is. Moon-young gives him her mansion's address, but Gang Tae already knows where it is. A flashback is shown from 20 years earlier, when Gang Tae brought flowers for Moon Young. She was happy to see him but was stopped by her mother before she could accept the flowers. When Moon Young later went outside to pick up the flowers, she angrily stomped on them, leaving Gang Tae heartbroken. Now, 20 years later, Gang Tae enters the mansion again, and Moon Young watches him from above. As he walks inside, he starts recalling memories. He confronts Moon Young, saying that being in the house brings back old memories. Gang Tae brings up the memory of the flowers, catching Moon Young off guard. She is taken aback, realizing that Gang Tae had known who she was all along. In disbelief, she asks if he was the boy who brought her flowers 20 years ago. Gang Tae confirms that he was indeed that boy whose life she had saved. Still confused, Moon Young questions why he kept it a secret for so long and never mentioned their past. Gang Tae calmly responds that there hadn't been a need to bring it up, as he had wanted to leave that part of his life behind. Despite his intention to move on, Moon Young tries to stop him, urging him to stay. She proposes that they could work together on her books, offering a future where they and Sang-tae could collaborate. Gang Tae, however, is firm, saying that he wants to move on from the past. He insists she shouldn't try to hold him back. As Moon Young tries to stop him, she slips and nearly falls, but Gang Tae catches her. Meanwhile, Sang-tae calls out to Gang Tae from downstairs, saying that Moon Young has given him a new job. Gang Tae tells him that this isn't their home and that they need to leave. Sang-tae refuses, showing the agreement he signed. Gang Tae angrily demands it, but Sang-tae doesn't hand it over, leading to Gang Tae forcibly grabbing it and tearing it up. Sang-tae becomes furious and begins to hit Gang Tae, eventually throwing him out of the house. Moon Young intervenes and tells Sang-tae to stop, offering her hand to Gang Tae to help him up, but Gang Tae refuses and gets up on his own. Moon Young warns him that if he keeps pushing people away, he will end up all alone, but Gang Tae remains silent and leaves the mansion in despair. Upon returning home, Gang Tae looks over the torn agreement and comes to understand that Sang-tae signed the contract with Moon Young, not for financial gain, but to purchase an RV for the two of them. This heartfelt realization deeply moves Gang Tae, stirring strong emotions. Later, Sang-tae, feeling unwell, repeatedly checks to see if Gang Tae has arrived. He eventually falls asleep while waiting, and Moon Young covers him with a blanket. The next day, Lee Sang-in tries to enter her mansion, but Sang-tae refuses to let him in. Sang-in then forces his way inside but ends up falling. Moon Young asks him what he needs, and Sang-in explains that he is worried about her and wants to take her back to Seoul. Moon Young tells him she has started working on her book and that Sang-tae is now her art designer. Just then, Gang Tae arrives with all his belongings, and Moon Young is pleased to see him. Sang-tae apologizes, and Gang Tae forgives him. Moon Young shows them to their room, which Sang-tae is delighted with. The next day, both brothers clean the house and prepare a meal. Moon Young is pleasantly surprised to find the house spotless and the meal ready. Having felt lonely all her life, she is overjoyed to see the house vibrant and lively because of the brothers. She enjoys the meal they prepared. Later, the three of them return to the hospital. Moon Young is going to give lecture, Sang-tae is painting, and Gang Tae is working. The director asks Gang Tae why he is afraid of butterflies. This question triggers a memory of a killer who had a butterfly pin on her clothes who killed his mother and left, causing Sang-tae to develop a fear of butterflies. On her way to class, Moon Young encounters a patient named Kang Yoon-ja, who believes Moon Young is her long-lost daughter who died in an accident years ago. Moon Young is shocked, as she is unsure if her mother is truly dead or alive, having been taken from the basement years ago. Yoon-ja insists Moon Young is her daughter, causing Moon Young to be momentarily stunned. Gang Tae intervenes, taking Yoon-ja outside. Despite his attempts to calm her, Yoon-ja continues to insist that Moon Young is her daughter. Moon Young, frustrated, reveals the truth that she is not her daughter, and that her daughter died in the accident. The revelation devastates Yoon-ja, causing her to faint. In a flashback, Dae-hwan is seen showing Moon Young's mother around the mansion. They all appear to be living happily, until one day, Moon Young discovers her mother's lifeless body in the basement. That night, Moon Young has a terrifying nightmare where her mother's ghost appears and threatens her, insisting that if she doesn't send the two brothers away, it will kill them. Moon Young wakes up in a panic, screaming. Gang Tae immediately rushes to her side, offering comfort. Despite her protests and her plea for him to leave for his own safety, Gang Tae refuses to go and promises to stay with her. He remains by her side all night, caring for her. When Moon Young wakes up the next morning and finds Gang Tae still there, she asks him why he is in her room. Gang Tae tells her he stayed to look after her because she wasn't feeling well during the night. While traveling on the bus, Sang-tae reads a story written by Moon Young to Gang Tae titled The Cheerful Dog. It's about a cute dog who dreams of exploring the world, but is unable to because it's tied up. The dog lives in hope of becoming free, and one day it finally succeeds in breaking its leash. Inspired by her own story, Moon Young tries to cut her long hair, which constantly reminds her of her cruel mother. Just as she's about to cut it, she hears her mother's voice again and stops. Frustrated, she smashes a mirror in her room. Hearing the noise, Sang-in rushes in and tells her she needs to leave the house and return to Seoul before she loses her mind. He starts packing her belongings and tries to force her out. Moon Young fights back, but Sang-in remembers all her tricks and avoids getting hurt. He almost manages to get her out when Gang Tae arrives and stops him. During the chaos, Moon Young pushes Sang-in down the stairs, but Gang Tae catches him just in time and sends him away. Later, Gang Tae gives Moon Young her medicine, worried about her health after the previous night. However, Moon Young refuses, saying she doesn't want to rely on medicine, and pushes it aside. To lighten the mood, Gang Tae takes her to a restaurant. There, Moon Young starts eating raw meat, and Sang Tae tells her to wait for it to cook properly. She responds playfully, saying she is so hot that it will cook inside her. That night, they walk by a fountain in a park, and Moon Young, feeling exhausted, asks Gang Tae to carry her on his back. Embarrassed, he starts fiddling with his phone, but Moon Young grabs it and almost throws it into the lake. Just then, a call from Ju Ri comes through. Playfully, Moon Young answers it, telling Ju Ri that she and Gang Tae are on a date. Gang Tae scolds her, asking for his phone back. They spend the night teasing each other and having fun. The next day, Eunja wakes up from her coma and remembers everything clearly. She recalls the night when her daughter bought her an expensive shawl and she scolded her harshly for spending so much money. Angry and hurt, her daughter stormed out of the shop and was tragically hit by a car, dying instantly. Overwhelmed with guilt, Eunja breaks down, wishing she had acted differently as her daughter might still be alive. Seeing Eunja's regret, Gang Tae is reminded of his own mother, who used to hurt him emotionally by saying she only gave birth to him so he could take care of Sang-tae. Gang Tae, feeling emotional, asks his friend Jae-soo if his mother also regretted her acts. Jae-soo, also moved, looks up to the sky and asks Gang Tae's mother why she treated him like that. Soon-deuk, who overhears this, tells Gang Tae that his mother didn't mean to be cruel. Rather, she was burdened with heavy responsibilities. Raising a special child like Sang-tae was extremely difficult, but his mother did it with great care. She advises Gang Tae to focus on the good memories of his mother, assuring him that he will find plenty of them. She then encourages him to eat, and Gang Tae, still emotional, starts eating while shedding tears. Gang Tae, still a bit intoxicated, returns to Moon Young. She's sitting in the hallway, waiting for him. He asks her to close her eyes. She thinks he's about to kiss her, but when she opens her eyes, she sees that he's holding a strange doll. He tells her he made it himself for Sang-tae a long time ago and named it Mang-tae. He says if she sleeps with the doll, it will keep bad dreams away. Moon Young happily accepts it. That night, as Gang Tae falls asleep, memories of his mother flood back. He recalls her buying him his favorite noodles, and the time he thought she only sheltered Sang-tae under her umbrella during a storm. The memory becomes clearer, and he realizes that his mother had called him also to join them under the umbrella. He also remembers her singing him lullabies and holding him close. These memories make Gang Tae realize that his mother loved him just as much as she loved Sang-tae. Overwhelmed, he hugs Sang-tae and tearfully says how much he misses their mother. Meanwhile, Moon Young sleeps soundly with Mang-tae, free from nightmares. The next day, they all return to work at the hospital. Moon Young finds out that her classes have been suspended for a few days because she had frightened Eunja. Furious, she goes to see Eunja and takes the expensive shawl that Eunja's daughter had given her before she died. Instead of feeling upset, Eunja is relieved, as Moon Young taking the shawl seems to lift a heavy burden off her shoulders. Later, Gang Tae visits Moon Young and praises her, saying he knows she took the shawl to help ease Eunja's pain. He's impressed by her kindness. He then recalls the story of the cheerful dog and tells Moon Young that she broke the chains of Eunja's past, setting her free. Later, Moon Young sees her father, who warns her that she'll meet the same fate as her mother. Moon Young responds confidently that she's different from her mother. Back at home, Moon Young finally cuts her long hair, a symbol of her past. When Gang Tae arrives, he's surprised to see her. She asks him to help finish cutting her hair. As he cuts it, Moon Young's face lights up with joy. She asks how she looks, and Gang Tae, unable to hold back, tells her she looks beautiful. Later that night, Sang-tae finds out that Moon Young has his doll, Mang-tae, and asks for it back. But Moon Young refuses, saying Gang Tae gave it to her. This leads to a playful pillow fight between them. Gang Tae comes in to break it up, but in the chaos, Mang-tae gets torn in two. Angry, Moon Young storms off. Gang Tae tries to comfort Sang-tae, explaining that he doesn't need the doll because Gang Tae is always there for him. He asks Sang Tae if he wants Gang Tae or Mang Tae, to which Sang Tae replies that he wants Gang Tae. He finally agrees to give the doll to Moon Young. Gang Tae stitches Mang Tae back together and hands it to Moon Young, saying it's now hers for good. However, Moon Young replies that she doesn't want Mang Tae, she wants Gang Tae. She then rests her head on his lap and falls asleep. Gang Tae gently places the doll in her hands and lovingly covers her with a blanket. He starts to feel his growing affection for Moon Young, but finds himself unable to express it. The next day, Moon Young, Gang Tae, and Sang Tae head to the hospital for work, where they run into Ju Ri and Soondeok. Soondeok, who now works as a chef at the hospital, invites them all to dinner. Moon Young agrees and, to tease Ju Ri, links arms with Gang Tae, making Ju Ri jealous. Even Sang Tae doesn't like this display of affection and steps between them, grabbing both their arms. Later, Moon Young gives a lecture where she discusses the story of Beauty and the Beast, explaining that it's not a love story, but a case of Stockholm Syndrome, where the captive falls in love with their captor. However, one of the patients, Julie, disagrees and says it's a story about love. She emphasizes that love is essential, and without it, nothing else matters. Julie becomes emotional, and her words deeply affect Moon Young as well. After the lecture, Moon Young steps outside to smoke. Julie's ex-husband, an alcoholic who used to abuse her, arrives, begging for forgiveness and promising not to hurt her again. Julie refuses, saying she's in love with someone else now. Enraged, her ex-husband begins to assault her. Seeing this, Moon Young throws a can at him and confronts him, demanding to know what men like him gain from hurting their wives. Furious, the man slaps Moon Young hard, causing her to fall. Just then, Gang Tae rushes in and attacks the man, beating him up. Julie asks Gang Tae to stop, and he does. But by then, the hospital staff has witnessed the whole scene. Moon Young is impressed by Gang Tae's bravery. He gently touches her face and asks if she's okay. Head nurse Park Hang-ja reports Gang Tae's actions to director Oh Ji-wong, accusing him of hitting a patient's relative. While director Oh doesn't want to fire Gang Tae, he's forced to do so due to the situation. Instead of being upset, Gang Tae feels a sense of relief, as if he's been freed. He rushes to Moon Young and excitedly tells her that he has quit his job and is now free. He reminds her of her promise, that once he quit his job, they would go on a trip together. Moon Young, feeling a mix of joy and sadness, agrees to go on the trip with him. Moon Young and Gang Tae are on their way for the trip. When Moon Young asks how long they'll be enjoying the trip, Gang Tae replies that it's just for one day, and they'll return tonight. This frustrates Moon Young, as she wanted to spend the night with him, but Gang Tae isn't ready for that yet. In her frustration, Moon Young speeds up the car to scare him. But when Gang Tae still doesn't give in, she stops the car, kicks him out, and drives away. Later that night, Gang Tae reconsiders and agrees to spend the night with Moon Young. Reflecting on the earlier events, he admits that he didn't know what got into him. He confesses to Moon Young that he struggles to control his emotions when he's around her. Just as they're about to share a kiss, they get interrupted by the sound of a deer, ruining the moment. Angry, Moon Young curses the deer for spoiling their special moment. The next day, Moon Young goes all out with her fashion for the trip, dressing up in an extravagant outfit. Gang Tae jokes that there's no need to dress up so much, but she insists that dressing up is what makes trips fun. She checks Gang Tae's backpack and throws out all the food, commenting that it seems like he's going on his first trip. They arrive at the mountains, and Gang Tae encourages Moon Young to cross a bridge. However, Moon Young is scared of heights and hesitates. Gang Tae suggests that she sing while crossing, so she starts singing, but her voice is so off-key that Gang Tae tells her to stop. Despite the mishaps, they enjoy their time together, taking selfies and sharing laughs. While enjoying their day, they spot Julie and her boyfriend, Choi Daniel. Julie, after the altercation with her ex-husband, has been called to America by her family for her safety. She is leaving the next day and wants to spend her last moments with Choi Daniel, who has run away from the psychiatric hospital to be with her. He pleads with Gang Tae not to report them and asks for his help, as it's partly because of Gang Tae that Julie is in this situation. Gang Tae promises to keep quiet. Secretly, Moon Young sneaks off and buys tickets for the night stay, not just for Julie and Choi Daniel, but also for herself and Gang Tae. When Gang Tae finds out, he's upset that she didn't book separate rooms for them. Moon Young teases him, saying that she just wants to enjoy the night. Later that night, Gang Tae asks Moon Young about her past, and if she ever had a best friend. Moon Young reveals that Ju Ri was her only friend when they were kids. Ju Ri stayed by her side so that no one would bully her, as all the other kids were scared of Moon Young. However, as time passed, Ju-ri started making other friends who also began to distance themselves from Moon-young because of her behavior. This led to Ju-ri breaking off their friendship. Moon-young says that she doesn't need friends now because she has Gang-tae. As they talk, Gang-tae drinks something he believes to be juice, but it turns out to be alcohol, and he gets drunk. Even in his drunken state, he tries hard to keep himself in check, not wanting to do anything inappropriate. Moon-young flirts with him playfully, but Gang-tae keeps pushing her away. They end up fighting throughout the night. The next morning, Gang-tae brings flowers for Moon-young and asks her not to trample on them this time. Moon-young happily accepts the flowers, and this time, Gang-tae kisses her. Julie and Daniel finally face their separation as Julie prepares to leave for America. Julie asks Daniel to come with her, but Daniel becomes emotional, explaining that his mental health isn't stable enough for him to join her yet. He promises that once he completes his treatment at the psychiatric hospital, he will come to her as a responsible man to take care of her. The two share an emotional farewell, embracing each other before parting ways. Afterward, Gang-tae and Moon-young drop Daniel back at the psychiatric hospital. Daniel casually tells his friend Kang Pil-ong about the enjoyable day he had. He also accidentally lets slip that Gang-tae and Moon-young are in a relationship. Oh Cha-young, one of Gang-tae's colleagues, overhears this and begins spreading the news to everyone. Sang-tae also hears about it and becomes upset, feeling betrayed that Gang-tae didn't tell him the truth about the previous night. Sang-tae confronts Gang-tae angrily, accusing him of lying. As emotions flare, Sang-tae brings up the painful memory from their childhood, recalling when Gang-tae, in a moment of frustration, wished that Sang-tae would die. Gang-tae tries to explain that he didn't mean it, but Sang-tae is overwhelmed with anger and pain, convinced that Gang-tae still harbors ill feelings toward him. He starts shouting that Gang-tae wants him dead. This emotional outburst leaves Gang-tae heartbroken, and he breaks down in tears, insisting that he never meant any harm. The hospital staff has to sedate Sang-tae to calm him down, and they place him in a separate room to rest. Meanwhile, Gang-tae sits outside, anxiously waiting for Sang-tae to wake up. Director Oh Ji-won calls Gang-tae and tells him that he can return to his job, as it's crucial for him to stay by Sang-tae's side and care for him. Despite waiting all day, Sang-tae doesn't go outside, and Gang-tae, now deeply depressed, leaves the hospital. Moon-young tries to stop him, but Gang-tae, overwhelmed by guilt, blames her for everything that has happened and asks her to leave him alone. He tells her that he's not worthy of her and spirals further into his depression. Later, Gang-tae confides in Jae-soo, telling him how much he enjoyed his time with Moon-young but admits that he can't stay with her because he needs to take care of Sang-tae. He feels torn between his duty to his brother and his desire to be with Moon-young. Meanwhile, in the hospital, head nurse Park Hang-ja gives Sang-tae the one and only copy of the book titled The Death of the Witch of the West, written by Moon-young's mother, and he curiously reads it. The next day, Moon-young visits Gang-tae and apologizes, pleading with him to come with her. She tries hard to convince him, but Gang-tae refuses, telling her that his purpose in life is to take care of Sang-tae, and because of that, he can't be with her. As he walks away, Moon-young cries out, asking him when he will finally start living his life for himself instead of for others. That night, Moon-young feels a deep sense of loneliness. She sends Gang-tae multiple messages, trying to find an excuse to get him to come to her, but he doesn't respond. In the midst of her loneliness, Ju-ri arrives, sent by Gang-tae to pick up some of his essential belongings. Moon-young invites Ju-ri to stay and have a drink, and Ju-ri ends up drinking more than expected. As Ju-ri gets drunk, she loses control and slaps Moon-young, calling her a bitch and accusing her of stealing the love of her life. She declares that she'll never forgive her for taking Gang-tae away from her before passing out. Sang-in then comes to pick up Ju-ri and takes her home. On the other hand, Gang-tae, filled with guilt and regret, breaks down in tears, repeatedly apologizing to Sang-tae for lying to him and promising never to lie again. Seeing his brother so emotional, Sang-tae feels pity for him and ultimately forgives him. The next day at the hospital, a patient named Park Ok-ran whispers in Dae-hwan's ear, claiming to be his wife, the one he had tried to kill. Shocked, Dae-hwan lashes out, calling her a monster and attempting to attack her. Gang-tae intervenes just in time to stop him. Every night, Park Ok-ran sings a lullaby in the male lobby, which causes Dae-hwan to have violent episodes. Director Oh Ji-won notices this suspicious behavior on the CCTV and calls Park Ok-ran in for questioning. However, she denies any involvement. Meanwhile, it's Moon-young's birthday. She waits outside Gang-tae's house, hoping to see him. Soon-duk notices her sitting alone and invites her to dinner. Moon-young enjoys the soup Soon-duk has made and, after the meal, heads back to her house. At the hospital, Gang-tae learns that Park Ok-ran has escaped and fearing that she might go to Moon Young's house, he rushes there in a state of panic. On the other side, Park Ok-ran has indeed arrived at Moon Young's house. She wishes her a happy birthday and claims to be her real mother. Moon Young doesn't believe her, but Park Ok-ran leaves a letter on the table and picks up a sharp pen. Sensing danger, Moon Young tries to stop her, but in the process, Park Ok-ran injures Moon Young's hand, causing it to bleed. Just then, Gang Tae arrives at the house, and upon seeing Moon Young's injured hand, he immediately embraces her, worried about her safety. When he asks where Park Ok-ran is, she tells him that she left just a while ago. Feeling hurt, she suspects that Gang Tae came only to catch Park Ok-ran and not because he was truly concerned about her. Angry, she retreats to her room. However, Gang Tae follows her and reassures her that he ran all the way there solely for her. He wishes her a happy birthday and kisses her, making Moon Young happy. Later, Gang Tae, exhausted from the stress, develops a high fever. Moon Young stays by his side all night, taking care of him. The next morning, Gang Tae's condition improves. He opens up to Moon Young, telling her about Sang Tae's traumatic past and how deeply the murder of their mother has affected him. He explains that Sang Tae still suffers from nightmares of that night, and that's why he can't leave Sang Tae alone. He promises her that he'll always keep both of them by his side. Moon Young understands and agrees. The following day, Moon Young visits Sang Tae, who is now working at Jae-soo's restaurant. She shows him a picture he drew of 3 people going on an adventure in an RV and asks him how he could forget his dream. She offers him the chance to become an art illustrator again. However, Sang Tae is still upset with Moon Young for lying to him, and he remains distant. Moon Young then, in her usual bold and determined way, shows Sang Tae the agreement paper he had signed, reminding him that if he breaks the agreement, he will have to pay 3 times the fine. Despite her efforts, Sang Tae still refuses. Determined, Moon Young orders a lot of pizza and invites Sang Tae to join her, but he angrily calls her a liar and runs away. Later, Moon Young shares this with Gang Tae, explaining how hard she tried to convince Sang Tae, but he wouldn't listen. Gang Tae teasingly tells her that she must have been forceful, suggesting that she should try talking to him with kindness instead. He adds that if she truly wants their relationship to continue, she has to make the effort. Gang Tae also tries to persuade Sang Tae to become Moon Young's illustrator, but Sang Tae is still unwilling. Frustrated, Gang Tae snaps, asking when Sang Tae will grow up and stop acting like a child. This angers Sang Tae, and the 2 brothers get into a fight. However, unlike previous arguments, Gang Tae finds himself enjoying the playful brawl. Both of them end up bruised and battered, but the lingering resentment they had toward each other begins to fade. That night, as Sang Tae sleeps, Gang Tae applies medicine to his wounds. Exhausted, Gang Tae falls asleep beside him, with a peaceful expression on his face. Sang Tae wakes up, and seeing his brother so happy for the first time in his life, he feels overjoyed. He hugs Gang Tae, and they fall asleep together. Their bond becomes stronger than ever. The next morning, as Gang Tae heads to work, Sang Tae calls him and suggests they go out for lunch together. Gang Tae, pleasantly surprised, agrees. Over lunch, Sang Tae shows maturity, serving food to Gang Tae and even paying the bill, declaring that from now on, he will act like a responsible older brother. Gang Tae is deeply touched and overjoyed by this change in Sang Tae. As they leave the restaurant, they run into Moon Young, who teasingly asks Sang Tae to pay for her meal too. Sang Tae refuses and walks away, leaving Gang Tae to cover her bill. As they step outside, Moon Young calls after Sang Tae saying, "I need a big brother too." This touches Sang Tae's heart, and he invites both Gang Tae and Moon Young to join him, strengthening their friendship once again. The next day, Gang Tae goes to Jae-soo's restaurant to enjoy some pizza. However, due to his handsomeness, a group of girls nearby starts flirting with him. Jae-soo captures the scene and sends a picture to Moon Young, who, upon seeing it, becomes furious and rushes to the restaurant. She arrives and scares off the other girls, while Gang Tae tries to calm her down. At the restaurant, Gang Tae sees some children playing and smiles, commenting on how pure and innocent children are. Moon Young mischievously responds, "Do you want to have kids with me too?" Gang Tae blushes and awkwardly changes the subject. Later, while grocery shopping, Moon Young continues teasing Gang Tae, loudly declaring that she wants to be the mother of his children, causing everyone around them to laugh. Gang Tae, embarrassed, tries his best to keep her quiet. After returning home, Moon Young, playful as always, sneaks up behind Gang Tae and hugs him tightly. She warns him that if he doesn't sleep in her room tonight, she won't let him go. Gang Tae, though hesitant, finally agrees. Later, as night falls, Moon Young, fully prepared and lying on her bed, waits for Gang Tae. However, Gang Tae tells her to sit on a chair, insisting he won't sleep beside her in bed. Moon Young offers him a drink, but Gang Tae declines, saying if they both drink, things might get out of hand. Moon Young drinks alone and eventually gets tipsy and loses her balance. Gang Tae catches her, but as Moon Young becomes more intoxicated, she begins to open up about her feelings. Gang Tae then asks her about how she feels about her mother. Moon Young, in her drunken state, admits that while her mother was a terrible person, she was still her mother. Hearing this, Gang Tae falls silent, reflecting on her words. The next day, Song Tae is traveling with Pilong on a bus. When the bus stops for a bit, Pilong hears the loud noises from a nearby construction site, which trigger traumatic memories of war. Pilong, a war veteran, is reminded of bombs and gunfire and begins to panic, screaming uncontrollably. Sang Tae quickly covers him with his jacket, trying to comfort and calm him down. He then takes Pilong to the hospital, where director Oh Ji-wong praises Sang Tae for saving the patient. Sang Tae gifts the director a copy of Moon Young's book, explaining how it gave him emotional strength. Seeing how Sang Tae's mental health has improved, director Oh Ji-wong calls him into his office, with Gang Tae present as well. Director gently urges Sang Tae to try to recall what really happened the night their mother was murdered. Slowly, Sang Tae's memories begin to surface. He remembers walking in the forest with his mother when he got distracted by a cat and wandered away. When he returned, he saw his mother lying on the ground, covered in blood, with her throat slit. The killer was a woman wearing a coat with a distinctive butterfly badge, a pair of butterflies, one large and one small. Sang Tae recalls the killer grabbing his hair and warning him to forget what he saw, or she would kill him too. This moment left a deep trauma in Sang Tae's mind, scarring him for years. Sang Tae and Gang Tae reported this to the police decades ago, but they were unable to find the killer, and the case was eventually closed without resolution. However, when Gang Tae hears the description of the butterfly badge, he is shocked. He rushes to look at a family photo of Moon Young and notices the same butterfly badge on her mother's coat. This realization shatters him emotionally as it dawns on him that the woman who murdered his mother was none other than Moon Young's mother. Overwhelmed by the revelation, Gang Tae punches the door in frustration, injuring his hand in the process as he struggles to cope with the truth. When Moon Young visits Gang Tae and sees his injured hand, she becomes worried and asks him how it happened. Gang Tae, clearly distressed, tells her he's not in the mood to talk. Despite her persistent questioning, he eventually snaps and yells, "Just leave me alone! I don't want to talk right now." Later, Gang Tae breaks down in front of director Oh Ji-wong, asking him what he should do. He's stuck in an impossible situation. His mother's killer is actually the mother of the woman he loves. He feels trapped because taking revenge would only hurt Moon Young. The director advises him to stay strong, but even he knows there's little that can be done now. Gang Tae, overwhelmed, looks at a picture of his mother and cries, wondering how he can ever get justice for her. He locks himself in his room, avoiding both Sang Tae and Moon Young. A few days later, the date for the group photo arrives, something Sang Tae and Moon Young had planned in advance. Moon Young tries to convince Gang Tae to join them, but he doesn't respond. They wait for him for a long time, and when it seems like he won't come, they go ahead without him. As the photo session begins, Gang Tae unexpectedly shows up, wearing a suit. Moon Young is delighted to see his new look, and the three of them take their pictures together. Shortly after, Moon Young's father, Dae Hwan, passes away, leaving her devastated. She recalls her childhood when he used to read her stories, but everything changed after a fight between her parents. Days later, the three return to the hospital, and Sang Tae becomes distressed when he sees his painting. Someone drew a butterfly on his painting. The butterfly in it is the same one that was on the coat of his mother's killer. When Moon Young sees the butterfly, she's shocked, realizing her mother used to wear the same butterfly badge. This realization hits her hard, and she breaks down in tears, finally understanding that her mother is still alive and coming to kill her. Panicked, she runs out of the hospital, with Gang Tae trying to calm her, but emotionally, she's already shattered. Later, director Oh Ji-wong shows Gang Tae a CCTV image, revealing that the butterfly badge was made by the hospital's head nurse, Park Hyung-ja. Now it's clear to both Gang Tae and the director that Moon Young's mother is actually Park Hyung-ja. She was the one who killed Dae Hwan by cutting his lifeline in the hospital. Before he died, she told him she had kept him in the hospital for 20 years just to slowly torture him. Now, Park Hyung-ja is planning to kill Moon Young as well. Moon Young, desperate for answers, asks Gang Tae to tell her the truth. Though hesitant, Gang Tae finally admits that it was Park Hyung-ja who killed his and Sang Tae's mother. Hearing this, Moon Young is devastated, crying uncontrollably, and questioning why her mother would do such a thing. She repeatedly apologizes to Gang Tae, but he hugs her and reassures her that none of this is her fault. It was her mother's crime, not hers. However, Moon Young, burdened by guilt, tells Gang Tae that she can't live with him and Sang Tae anymore. Every time she looks at them, she'll be reminded of how much her mother hurt them. She urges him to take Sang-tae and leave. Gang-tae refuses, promising that he will always stay with her and never leave her side. But despite his reassurances, Moon-young insists that they go. After some time, Sang-tae brings food to Moon-young's room, as she hasn't eaten in days. He gently feeds her, spoonful by spoonful, while she eats through her tears, repeatedly apologizing and asking for forgiveness. Sang-tae doesn't understand why she's apologizing. Later, he tells Gang-tae that Moon-young has been asking for forgiveness, though he doesn't know why. Hearing this, Gang-tae, emotional, hugs Sang-tae and praises him for feeding her, but he keeps the real reason for her apologies to himself. The next day, Park Hung-ja calls Gang-tae and asks to meet him alone. He decides it's time to finally confront his mother's killer. When they meet, his anger flares up, but he tries to control it. She has already given Sang-tae a sedative to make sure he stays asleep and won't interfere. Hyung-ja asks if he has read the letter Park Ok-ran left on the table. Gang-tae confirms he read it and dismissed it as nonsense. Park Hyung-ja then reveals that according to the deal in the letter, he must leave Moon-young and disappear, or she will kill everyone. Gang-tae refuses, saying he will never leave Moon-young alone with someone as cruel as her. When he asks why she wants Moon-young alone, Park Hyung-ja coldly explains that Moon-young is her creation, and she won't let anyone ruin her masterpiece. Shocked by this, Gang-tae accuses her of treating her daughter like a mere object, consumed by her selfishness. At that moment, Park Hyung-ja recalls the day she killed Gang-tae's mother, triggered by the sight of a pen. She remembers how Gang-tae's mother had worked as a maid in her house and once saw Moon-young killing butterflies. Concerned, she had suggested that Moon-young needed psychological help and even offered to admit her to a hospital, the same one where Sang-tae was being treated. This infuriated Hyung-ja, who felt insulted and immediately fired her. Later, in a fit of rage, she used that same pen to kill Gang-tae's mother by slitting her throat in the forest. As Gang-tae hears this, tears stream down his face as he cries out that she killed his mother over something so trivial. She laughs at his anguish, provoking him further. Consumed by rage, Gang-tae lunges at her, trying to strangle her. Instead of fighting back, she provokes him further, daring him to kill her as it will destroy his relationship with Moon-young forever. Thinking of Moon-young, he hesitates and pulls back. Seizing the opportunity, Hyung-ja injects him with a sedative, causing him to lose consciousness. Moon-young arrives immediately, and seeing Gang-tae's condition, panics. She grabs the pen and, in a desperate move, tries to stab her mother. Just before she strikes, Gang-tae, despite his weakened state, steps in and takes the blow, injuring his hand. Moon-young breaks down in tears, asking him why he stopped her. Meanwhile, Park Hyung-ja tries to seize the opportunity to attack Moon-young with the pen, but Sang-tae swiftly intervenes, grabbing a heavy book and hitting Park Hyung-ja on the head, knocking her unconscious. The police arrive and arrest Park Hyung-ja, taking her away. Director Oh Ji-won tells her that her game is over and she'll spend the rest of her life in prison. Park Hyung-ja, however, smiles and says that her purpose for coming here has been fulfilled, and Moon-young and Gang-tae will never be able to be together. Days pass, and Moon-young doesn't speak to Gang-tae. Deep down, she feels responsible for the murder of Gang-tae's mother. She hasn't eaten in days. Since Gang-tae can't meet her directly, he contacts Juri for help, asking her to bring Moon-young to her home to comfort her because she is deeply depressed. Juri calls Moon-young and asks if she can visit her mother, Soon Daeok, who is ill and wants to see her. Initially, Moon-young refuses, but she later agrees to visit. When Moon-young arrives, she finds that Soon Daeok is perfectly fine and wonders why she was called. Soon Daeok explains that her only purpose was to cheer her up and has prepared a special meal for her. After some insistence, Moon-young begins to eat. Soon Daeok advises her to forget what happened and move on, not to punish herself for her mother's sins. When Moon-young returns home, she finds Sang-tae waiting for her. Sang-tae, who previously struggled with drawing emotions, tells her that he has learned how to draw emotions perfectly. He shows her a drawing of Gang-tae's smiling face, which brings tears of joy to Moon-young's eyes. At the hospital, Gang-tae plants a tree in his mother's name and hangs a group photo of himself, Sang-tae, and Moon-young. Moon-young approaches the tree and apologizes to Gang-tae's mother, feeling responsible for everything. Gang-tae arrives and tells her that she is not to blame and shouldn't mourn. Despite his reassurance, Moon-young leaves without responding. Gang-tae follows her, repeating, "I love you," just as Moon-young did at the beginning. He continues to say, "I love you," while Moon-young walks away without replying. Eventually, they both arrive home, and Gang-tae, with sincerity in his eyes, says, "I love you," from the depths of his heart and gently kisses her. Now, Moon-young feels happy and agrees to stay with Gang-tae. He tells her that they should leave the past behind and start fresh. Days pass, and Moon-young begins writing a new book again, this time with Sang-tae's help. Gang Tae tries to read the story, but Moon Young, wanting to keep the suspense, playfully kicks him out. After months of hard work, the storybook is finally completed, and Sang In publishes it through his company. Sang Tae, overwhelmed with emotion, takes the book to their mother's plant and reads it aloud while crying, telling his mother, "I've become a professional artist, Mom." Gang Tae is also moved to tears and hugs him. The book is about three friends whose real faces are stolen by a witch. They embark on an adventurous journey to recover their true faces. After facing many challenges, they finally defeat the witch and retrieve their real identities. However, in the end, they realize it wasn't their faces but their happiness that the witch had taken, and they succeed in reclaiming it. At the publication ceremony, Moon Young and Sang Tae get so excited to present their book that they start playfully arguing over who gets to tell the story. Their little squabble makes everyone laugh. The dark shadows from their lives have finally lifted, and happiness fills their hearts. Sang Tae also completes the mural at the hospital, and director Oh Ji-won gifts him an RV as a reward. When Gang Tae asks why such a big gift, director explains that for 20 years he failed to see Park Hung-ja's true nature, even though she worked under him. The RV is a reward for both brothers' patience and resilience. With the RV, Moon Young, Gang Tae, and Sang Tae set off on a long adventure. They enjoy the journey together, embracing the joy that has returned to their lives. As things settle down, Sang Tae senses that Moon Young and Gang Tae might need some privacy. He shares that he's been offered a job as an art director by another writer and would like to accept the opportunity. Gang Tae, with tears in his eyes, hugs Sang Tae and tells him to take care of himself. Just then, Sang In arrives to pick him up, and with that, the beautiful journey comes to an end.